Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fanny Sonfai. I am the project officer of the I Access My Rights project at Terdezom, Hungary. This webinar is part of our webinar series organized as part of the project, and today's session will focus on ethical challenges of AI development for children in the justice system. The session will be recorded, and we will upload the video to the project website. During the webinar, you can use the chat and share your questions that we try to answer at the end of the session. First of all, I am happy to introduce our panelists, Boglárka János-Kuti, child rights expert with over a decade of experience in children's rights and migration. She works as an external consultant for the Council of Europe, Terdezom Europe, and Hintalobon Foundation, and served as a board member of the Hungarian Child Rights Coalition. Her expertise includes child safeguarding and the safe use of technology with a focus on AI tools and children's access to justice. Moreover, Boglárka is also an external consultant for the I Access My Rights project. I would like to introduce Jojo Kalloga as well, who is a dedicated child and women's rights expert. She has led impactful initiatives supporting vulnerable groups, including street children and victims of trafficking. Jojo also played a key role in developing a chatbot to assist individuals affected by domestic violence worldwide. And last but not at least, I would like to introduce Ajcha Atabey, a lawyer and researcher at the University of Edinburgh, specializing in child-centered AI design and policy frameworks for responsible Gen AI in schools. She also consults at the Digital Futures for Children Center at the London School of Economics and Political Science, and has worked with UN Women on gender equality, AI, and data protection. Before I give the floor to you, I would like to give a brief overview of the project. So one of these initiatives' main mission was to design and develop a generative AI chatbot together with children that provides reliable, child-friendly, and age-appropriate legal information for children in contact with the law. And the iAccess chatbot basically can simplify legal terminology and explain legal processes, making justice systems more inclusive and easier to understand. The chatbot is multilingual, and it's now implemented in 3 countries, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. When we started this process, we realized that there are various chatbots on the market, but most AI chatbots for children are often on the profit rather than the well-being of the child. These chatbots, often designed as companion agents that aims to offer emotional support or entertainment, but they are often criticized by their addictive features, weak privacy protections, and lack of safeguards. So basically, good examples on this field were not available, and the legal and policy framework is also incomplete. So through this project, we aim to find a solution to this policy challenge. We prioritize during the whole process principles such as privacy by design, safety by design, and in general, the best interest of the child. Our goal was to create a tool that protects children's rights and provides reliable legal information and also empowers children. So now I would like to give the floor to Boglárka, who will give a detailed overview about the ethical concerns that can arise when developing a chatbot for children. So Bogi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And I will just put it into full screen mode. Hope you can see it now. Yes, great. Okay, so hi everyone, and thank you for the invitation and also for this introduction. I will present the study that I have the chance to conduct under Terre des Hommes, and it is about the potential and limitations of artificial intelligence chatbots. I will mainly focus on three different areas. So first, we will discover the ethical and fundamental rights risks in relation to these AI chatbots that are designed for children in this field, then on the limitations and potential uses, and finally, little guidance will be provided that was developed during the findings of this study. So first of all, when we see this triangle of AI, children, and ethics, we need to bear in mind that children need a differentiated treatment because they are affected differently by AI compared to adults. And this is due to their evolving developmental capacities. And we also have to bear in mind that disruptive technology as AI is, it is evolving in a very fast pace, and it is difficult to keep up with these technological advancements in terms of providing the necessary ethical safeguards for children so that this can be a really safe technology to be deployed for them. So in this regards, we need to also emphasize the really essential starting point that children needs to be regarded as from a developmental point of view, because their brains are still under development and until they're 25 years old. And in this sense, the adverse impacts that AI can have on their brain are really need to be taken into consideration before deploying such tools. So all these aspects in mind, we have to see that there needs to be adequate guardrails when we design and develop AI tools for children in this very specific context of access to justice, and that a preventative or anticipatory approach is needed to just bear in mind this do no harm approach, and also analyze at the beginning in advance whether AI is the right solution to solve a certain specific issue. So it is important to avoid AI washing and to give an added value to the use of AI. So what are these ethical and fundamental rights-based risks that we encounter in this field? Well, the privacy issues have been already discussed upon in the recent years because of children's access to not AI technologies, but other kind of technologies. So it is already a topic that has been already discussed upon, but there are some new ones, which is especially the anthropomorphic design itself of AI tools, which is really an issue to deal with. And it is very much interlinked to the hallucinations and also to the risk of unauthorized practice of law. So I will focus on these three risks in my presentation, and especially on the one concerning the anthropomorphic design, which we have to see that children, due to their developmental capacities, which are still evolving, they sometimes don't know where is the line between reality and fantasy. So for them, it's even more difficult to differentiate whether they are talking to a real person or is it a robot. So to avoid their emotionally over-reliance on these tools, it is really important to introduce specific guardrails and also to emphasize the complementarity nature of these tools, so these AI chatbots. And this was also undertaken during the whole project when talking and thinking about ethical guardrails. So then the other issue is hallucinations, because of course LLMs are capable of delivering inaccurate outputs because they are originally not really designed to tell the truth, but to rather be convincing and persuasive in terms of output. So in this sense, children are really even more vulnerable because they can more over rely on some answers that might not be correct or even unsafe advice, which can lead to devastating consequences in their own lives. So this is really another important issue to take into consideration and to tailor the chatbot to be able to adequately handle these alert situations when children are delivering really wrong situations. So the other concern, which is quite interlinked with the previous one, the hallucinations, is the risk of unauthorized practice of law, which is really important to address, because the chatbot's limitation is that it cannot offer individualized legal advice, and it is only limited to legal information. So this individualized assessment can only be made by human child protection workers or lawyers, and that's why there are some features that need to be put in place in order for the chatbot to be safe in these regards. The biases are also very much in this field of ethical concerns, a very much discussed topic, and the importance is to have a very curated data set in order to minimize these human errors that can be encountered by children. The privacy issues, I will just say one word in this sense, that it was difficult to consolidate the safety considerations vis-a-vis children, and on the other hand, their need or they really wanted to have more and more answers to their questions, but these two needed to be consolidated because of these data minimization principles. So in the end, we can conclude that all in all, in order to make a chatbot that is really safe for children, it needs to be explained for them what kind of information is provided for them. It has to be a complementary tool, and it has to be prepared, very well prepared for those situations in case children are encountering difficult life moments. And it isn't a child rights lawyer, so it is only capable of providing legal information and practical information, and it is neither a mental health counselor or a psychologist, so we need to avoid emotional over-reliance. And is it efficient? We don't know it yet. It is still in the making, and we will see it once it will be already deployed for a while. And last but not least, the guidance, to just complement some of what has already been said. We need to ensure that it has an added value, and also that reliable answers are guaranteed for children when they use chatbots for legal advice and legal information. So thank you, and that's all. And I will stop to share.
Thank you very much, Bogi, and you can find the link of the full study in the chat box. Your presentation was very, very interesting, so thank you very much for this, and we will come back to you in the discussion to explore more specifically these solutions, the technical solutions for the iAccess chatbot. And now I would like to ask Jojo to share her experiences on chatbot development for vulnerable groups and highlight the solutions that you suggest mitigating the risk that can come up through the process.
Thank you so much, Fanny, and good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So I'm really happy to join the webinar today to share some insights. I haven't worked directly on the iAccess project, although I'm really interested into it. But as a child right lawyer, I have also worked on developing a chatbot dedicated for people affected by domestic violence. And these insights are literally coming from a practical background while developing and launching this tool in different countries. So the first thing that I have 4 points that I might address during this presentation. And the first point is related to the users. The first ethical point to address from my point of view is something related to the users, meaning the children. Because when we say children, in my head, and I think I'm sure like in many head as well, we just think uh, which range of these children, because it's from 0 to, in some countries, 18. And Bogi also just mentioned that AI can have actually impact on people and on individuals until 24 years old. So until they are 24 years old. So which range do we wanna address? And I think depending on that as well, the content will be different or might be different. The rules might be different, because for a children, I would say from 0 or from 5 to 10, they would need more guidance, whereas another, like when they are older, they might have more freedom into the answers and the interaction with the chatbot or an AI tool. So also another consideration that when developing the chatbot I was working on, but also I think that might be useful in this process, is really to make sure that they kind of tick their kind of an age consent. It's good when we work on child protection too, because we all have the purpose to protect children, right? And then to kind of make accessible justice to them. But it's also good that as professionals and organizations that are kind of supporting people in vulnerable situations, especially children, that we also protect ourselves. And it's kind of a disclaimer that we used to use, sorry for the repetition, to make sure that people that are interacting with the chatbot are actually the targets that we designed the chatbot for. And then the other point is the language, because something that we actually realize is that when you talk to people, and I'm sure also I'm really happy to hear your thought on that, but when you talk to someone in their mother tongue, especially a children, they might be more comfortable, more willing to share and to ask questions. Whereas when they talk in in an official language, especially when they are not yet at school, they might face some language barriers. So that is why, related to the chatbot addressing domestic violence, in some countries, for instance, I can take the example of Peru. We launched it in Spanish, but also we included Quechua, which is a language that is well spoken in the mountains, but also with indigenous people, to really make sure that we cover more, a larger audience, and then make them comfortable. Or sometimes the dialect. If I take the example of Switzerland, for instance, they learn French and German at school, but most of the people here, they just speak Swiss German, which is really different from actually the actual German. I mean, I'm learning German, but I don't understand any word of Swiss German. And in these situations, sometimes it can be kind of a threshold for people reaching for help. And the last point is, in terms of inclusion, I think also Bogi talked about it at some point, is to make sure that we kind of include, there is no bias in terms of exclusion, either by the low literacy, but also with people, for people living with some disabilities. So a solution that we experienced when developing the chatbot was to have some video chat with the users so that they do not have to read and write everything. And these are some solutions to explore, I believe, to just make sure that we kind of make the chatbot very, very inclusive for people. And as a second point, it's more relevant to the content itself. And as Bogi said, it's really related to making sure that the content is trustful, useful, but also verified by professionals. That is very important because as children, I mean, there is a lot of information out there, and I was very happy to be at the final conference at Sophia because we have been talking about hallucinations, but also how do we want to set up our chatbots? Do we want the chatbot to take the knowledge base from the web that is large and we don't know what is true or not, or do we want to feed it ourselves to make sure that we can kind of have a control on the content itself? And I think for a chatbot designed for children, the second option, like literally building our knowledge articles and knowledge base, is the best, might be the best option. Adapted information as well. And it also calls the age consideration that I mentioned before, really making sure, because we talk about law, right? And this is, even for adults, for some adults, this is a very complicated word for some of us. So we need to make sure that the content is really digestible for them, depending on their age, and which information do we want to give them to not really afraid them, but also make sure that we kind of reach the goal we want. So we need to have, I think, an age consideration to adapt the information we're providing, an adapted tone as well, to make sure that it's very friendly, very, very empathetic, very patient as well. It's a whole different story to talk to adults and then to talk to children, I would say. The message length also is something that I would really insist on, because at some point I think children might just lose their concentration when they have some kind of conversation, and we need to make sure what do we want to address and which goal do we want to have with them. Do we want just to give them the necessary information to get help, or do we want to really make them comfortable, and at which level do we need to stop the chat? Because generative AI is actually sometimes it can be very talkative. And then the interactivity. Do we want the chatbot to really sometimes ask how they feel, or do we just want to give information and kind of push them to seek for human support? So these are some questions that need to be addressed. And then as a third point, the security, privacy, safety. Something that we noticed is that for some platforms, for instance, this is a matter of anonymity, because from an experience that I can share is that when we were talking to our service provider for the chatbot related to domestic violence, we were like, oh, we do want to anonymize everything. We do not want to store any data. And they'd say, yes, it's deleted. Is it deleted? Yes, yes, yes. And then we even talked to the technical team and they said yes. And when developing and implementing it, we realized that what they mean with it's deleted is that it's actually deleted from the user side. If whenever they close the window, they won't see any of the storage of the messages, but this is stored in their server, and with some coding, it was possible to actually get the story of the discussions, which was really an issue for us. So we needed to have some back and forth, and at some point I think the language between legal people and technical people we can have some back and forth and different language. So we need to really make sure that they understand what we want, and the service providers as well. The data protection also, there is here a kind of a dilemma, because we want to have, at some point with these kind of tools that are protecting people in vulnerable situations, we want to not store any data. But at some point, we also need to take into consideration that the data can help really improve the chatbot. And coming from an experience, it can also let us know what kind of questions people are asking. How do we want to improve? But because let's remember that if we want to really control the content, we might also need to know, oh, actually, these people are asking this and this and this. Then we need to add more content and more context, so and more information. And this can be really useful. So the solution that we adapted is to anonymize all the data by coding, making sure that even the IP address is not traceable at all. But then we can see the request from the users and no personal information, but only the request that would help us improve the content. And then the strong filters. Let's say like you have someone that self-harm, for instance. I think Bogi just mentioned that. Suicidal term. We need to make sure that we build the chatbot in a way that as far as they get some requests that are general and to the purpose, the chatbot can answer, but also that the chatbot can detect some words that can trigger actually the chatbot and help it surface generic information saying, I'm not an emergency service, for instance, kind of these information. And that also leads me to kind of have a recommendation about thinking about a reporting button, because let's consider that we're talking about children. What happens if they are in really like in an emergency situation? Are we going to surface a message saying that it's not the chatbot is not an emergency service and then that's it? Or do we want to kind of take another step and say, actually, this child is in an emergency situation? Do we want to call the police? Do we want to call a child right lawyer or something, a social worker? But this is something I would recommend to have kind of have many partners around the table and discuss, okay, if we have a reporting button, what would be the next step and who would take the lead? And as a last point, we need to remember that technology, we are at a stage where technology is very much needed, but it comes with a lot of risk and we need to have control on it. We cannot ignore it. It's impossible. And in all our life, but we need to make sure what do we want it to do and how, and then still have a control on it. And with that, we also need, when it comes to using a tool to help people, children access their rights and access justice, we need to make sure and fix the step where we want to give the case to a human support, right? And that is, we can take into consideration some important information related to the emotional dependency. We want support, but we do not really want to create an emotional dependency between the chatbot or technology and children. That can have some really, really bad consequences. Informative and encouraging to find support. It is also related to the content, but also the wording and the tone that the chatbot is using. Actually, it has to be really encouraging to go probably towards a human support. Complementary setup, and that is also related to the parents themselves, but also to social workers, because if we want to encourage them to seek help, we need to work also with these people that are around to make sure that if the children is led to them, they can take care of him, right? Or their request. And that is a very it's a very needed process, but a very complicated process, because the abusers actually can be from actually the family. There are in some cases, it can be even the parents, but it can also come from social workers, at some point when they are living there. So we need to make sure that these people also that are around are trustable. And how do we have an alternative? And then another complementary setup is the police and the court support to just avoid discrepancy. Because if the chatbot is very simple to use, very well designed, and for the children to be very safe and very straightforward for them, and then when it comes to the police and any other step that is outside to help them access justice, and then they face a lot of complication there, it would be like a big difference between the two. So we need to make sure also that we have some activities outside of technology to make sure that all the system is very digestible and straightforward and easy to use for children, I would say. So yeah, these are some insights that I had from my very humble experience, and I'm really happy to hear from other presentators and panelists, and then yeah, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jojo. It was impressive to hear your pragmatic approach. And now I would like to invite Aicha to share her thoughts on the legal and ethical challenges of developing AI chatbots based on some of the use cases she is currently researching. I'm sharing the slides now.
Thank you very much, Fanny. Yes, I'll be talking about more generally about chatbots and legal and ethical issues that I would like to raise today with a specific reference to children's rights. Is my screen? Let me see.
Sorry, I mean,
No worries at all. No worries at all. I'm also, yeah, thank you. Can also. Maybe I could start in the meantime because the first slide. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm seeing it now. So actually, the first slide is mostly about highlighting the point that has already been made, which Fanny also said, that actually the legal frameworks that we have now in different parts of the world are not enough. And there's a recent, maybe in the next slide, we might see there's a recent study published by the Council of Europe, which I also contributed to with Alan Turing Institute, with the colleagues at Alan Turing Institute. If we could go to the next slide, please, Fanny, or maybe do I do that? Yeah, thank you so much. So the current legal gaps we have, I won't be going into much of a detail, but I think what is really important there is that there is very little in the legal frameworks when we look at the national laws as well. At the EU level, of course, now we do have EU AI Act, which is a major tech law recognizing children's rights in the digital environment, and set out in the general comment 25, which is super important and which should be our guiding light throughout, which I'll be talking about later in my presentation. But the point is that I want to also make when we talk about ethical and legal issues is that we know that there's missing elements in the laws, but also let's look at what we already have, like data protection law that again was mentioned today, and also some of the actually not very much talked principles like fairness, which is I think really, really important when talking about chatbots and legal compliance, because fairness is not only about, for example, in addition to data minimization that I think Bogarka already mentioned, purpose limitation and other principles. I think fairness is super important because it is also about really prioritizing children's best interests. We can take, I think I would say here, probably in the UK, the approach that is taken towards fairness, which was the underpinning principle that led to age-appropriate design code, which is about designing online services in an age-appropriate way. And you can also have a look at it as an, I think, inspiration that could be in terms of designing when designing chatbots as well. There are standards that needs to be taken into account for designing age appropriately. So I think fairness is really important, and it brings us the question to look beyond bias and non-discrimination issues. So and children's rights, putting really children's rights at the heart of it, which is really, really important, and which should be the way forward when we talk about chatbots in general. So if you may maybe move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So ethical and legal issues, I think a few that I think are super important that I really want to talk about today briefly is about when it comes to interactions as well, and the anthropomorphism, which was already mentioned, which is really important because the emotional aspect when we talk about it, when you think about this, and I think the discussions we are having in this context, in the chatbot context, make me also think of emotional AI, and what we were discussing in the past few years in general about emotional AI and actually the impact that would have on children's rights, especially thinking about, I think these are some of the things that are not in general being paid attention enough, is the freedom of thought and freedom of expression, in addition to, of course, all the privacy, data protection issues and other child rights issues as well. But what I would like to pay attention here is that really when we are talking about these risks, it would be super important to consider and really carefully think about how these would affect these particular rights, and make the connection there, because emotions and the way that a child is affected is, as children are vulnerable. We know that this was already mentioned in the previous presentations. Diodia also mentioned the special age appropriateness aspect. I think I completely agree. I would also really highlight that because in terms of, for example, making information accessible to children in an age-appropriate way. One additional thing I really want to highlight here is the accessibility issue. When I say accessibility or inclusivity, I like going more than like age-based vulnerability layers, for example, taking into account learning disabilities as well, because the way an information is delivered to a child and the way actually how a child will perceive this and whether this will be effective enough, it will be communicated in a most effective way, let's say, really depends on whether it's age appropriate, of course, but also whether it caters for the needs of the specific child and specific additional vulnerabilities that child might have. For example, if you have, I think concentration was mentioned by Dio was also, concentration is an issue. For example, let's think about children with ADHD. We need to make an extra effort taking into account vulnerabilities of those groups as well. And I think when we think about different vulnerability layers and make a system work for the most vulnerable, it works for everyone. So I think that's a really good way. Inclusivity is a really, really important thing to take into account. And this could be, in terms of, I'm thinking in terms of design, maybe an example. This could be like it could be supported with features like even like changing the colors. These are simple things, I know, but I think there's already a lot out there in terms of accessibility, learning disabilities, and this is just one example of different vulnerabilities that might be taken into account. But I think because we are talking about delivering information, I think that is super important. And also what I'm sharing now is also important in terms of compliance with transparency rules in the GDPR and data protection laws in general. So just something to bear in mind. I think that might be important. And hallucinations, again, inaccurate outputs and the effect that might have on the child, especially their right to information and also freedom of thought. And I think Bulgarka made an amazing point in mentioning that actually this is not just just not a wrong information, but it can have a huge impact on the child's life. So that is, I think, really important to take into account. So when we talk about this justice context, stakes are really high, and whatever discussions we are having about chatbots in general in other contexts are still applicable, but now this is even in a more vulnerable context. So taking this lens, I think, is really important, and I think with this project, one of the amazing things that you're doing and setting an example for everyone in different parts of the world as well. So I'm just checking really aware of the time, conscious of the time, hearing from children. Yes, and one really key issue is that, and if I remember correctly, in this project, this was done as well, really consulting children themselves. I think that is really key, and we can't make assumptions as adults themselves. So this is a really sensitive context, of course, but there are, in an appropriate way, participatory design, like making sure that we hear from those who are affected by those technologies are super important. And it's not only hearing from them, but also making sure that actually what they say really, it matters and it makes a change. So making changes to the chatbot itself and the way it is used, design is super important. And yeah, ethical challenges that I might really quickly, that is I think is something that might be taken into account. But since we are talking more about the children, the ethical aspects and legal aspects, looking from a child's perspective, I'm not going to go much in detail. Although this, I think, is quite important when we think about the risks to privacy and data protection, and in terms of data sharing. So the child should know where the data goes, and I think that goes aligned with the data protection laws anyways. And maybe we could go to the next one, if it's the next slide. Please, yeah, thank you so much. So I think we should be asking what I would like to wrap up my presentation with is we talked about all these, vulnerability issues, different children's rights, and these are the freedom of thought, expression, privacy are just some that I'm mentioning today. But of course, we need to have a holistic approach. We need to think about all the rights, and I think this is really, really key. And this is also really key in terms of compliance as well. But I'm not going to go much into detail for that. But maybe one example, one very obvious one is privacy, data right to privacy of the child, and the data protection laws, and the fairness principle that I mentioned before. It is not only about, fairness in terms of bias and preventing discrimination, but it's also really about thinking about children's best interest, what is best for the child, and children's rights in general. So here, this is what you're seeing here is children's rights by design toolkit that was developed by my colleagues at the Digital Futures for Children Center, Professor Sonia Livingston and Dr. Kokai Pothong, which I think should be, should be an inspiration, and also more than inspiration, it should be also used in when thinking about these chatbots, in general, and any technology, anything that is being designed and developed. And this is basically the 11 principles that you're seeing now. They're mapped to as you can see, different articles in the UNCRC, and basically this is a guiding way. This is a toolkit that was developed for those for different stakeholders, but particularly for those also who are designing technologies. So what is important, I'm not going to go into detail of all these 11 principles, but you can check it out. It is an accessible toolkit, and very happy to share information afterwards as well with anyone who might be interested. But what's important that I want to mention is the holistic approach that we really need to take. And also the child rights impact assessment. I think it is super important. It's really key. I think Bulgarka also mentioned this. It should be whatever whatever is being done for chatbots, child rights impact assessments, we need to make sure that they're conducted. So I think child rights impact assessment as a mechanism really for checking and being accountable for delivering the child rights by design. So I think this is something that we can also keep in mind. And I think wrapping up, being conscious of time, maybe the last slide is, as you can see, I think I really very much put all the emphasis on the children's rights. I really believe that this should be the way forward. And I think when we think about design, even the technical aspects, not even actually particularly, and the legal compliance issues as well, these should be, the General Comment 25 should be our guiding way forward, and children's rights should be at the heart of every single decision that is being made. And we need to make sure that vulnerability is a key aspect that I also mentioned. Age appropriateness is super important, but in addition to age-based vulnerabilities, making sure that, for example, the information is accessible, actually that accessibility, what it means for different groups of children. I think that is really key that I want to probably end my presentation with. And child-centered AI design and hearing, putting children's right at the center of that is definitely key. And hearing from children themselves is a huge part of that. And thank you so much for listening, and very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Aicha, for your, I'm still sharing, or no?
No, you're not. You're not
Thank
sharing.
you. Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation. And now I would like to open the floor for the questions and for the discussion. I encourage the audience and also the panelists to share their questions. But first of all, if I may, I would like to address the questions to Boglárka. Bogi, could you please share specific examples on how the ethical challenges were addressed through technical solutions in the development of the iAccess chatbot, sorry?
Yes, sure. So basically, the first solution that was really crucial to guarantee that the answers are really reliable and that they do not harm children was that we limited to one question and one answer this whole structure of questioning or conversation with the chatbot. And by that, of course, it was a decision undertaken also with some cons and some pros. The con was that in this sense, the answers are not that much tailor-made and that much, specific. But on the other hand, this was a balance to take into account, and the rights of the child to not to be harmed was something that prevailed over the fact that he or she could get really precise information. So that was one choice, and the other choice was the well-curated data set as well. So we only had these legal frameworks implanted within this whole data set. So the chatbot does not learn from user interactions. So in this sense, the biases can be prevented. And also in terms of privacy, it was really important not to collect personal information about children. So it means that these conversations are not stored at all, and that was also something which was a quite necessary guardrail to provide these safe and ethical, answers for children. Maybe in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Bogi, for your answer. Anyone else from the audience or panelists? Do you have any questions? Nothing? Okay. Then I have a question to Aicha. What message as a good practice or ideal suggestion you can give to those who develop or design a chatbot in child-friendly justice?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I think in terms of, well, I think I have several messages, that's what I thought, but I think one key thing that I might already have mentioned is really to hear from children themselves and include them and engage with them in every decision-making processes, and that also includes the design. But maybe one critical thing when I say that is I don't think that should be just, just before design, during the design, but also, when the chatbot is being used. I think thinking about in terms of more practical things, like I think Diodio mentioned that in terms of like a feature or a button, maybe, if I don't remember exactly, but basically thinking about what can be done in practice so that actually children give feedback, actually share their views and opinions is really important. And this is not also only limited to feedback, of course. But basically, I think putting children in participatory design, I would say, is really key for different stakeholders. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Aicha. Any questions?
Yes, maybe I will jump and ask
Okay.
Dio one question. So about this reporting, could you maybe just elaborate a bit on that? Because I think it's a really important point to make, that in such cases where children are in kind of really hard life situations, and in these situations, the chatbot needs to react adequately and in a safe way. So what are the technical features to enable this to happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larka, for this question. So this is an important and interesting brainstorming idea that we have been having for the domestic violence chatbot. And I think it's also worth mentioning and also really considering it because let's say in the situation where the children is actually in a house where he is actually abused, right? And he's seeking for help. If we just telling him, oh, are you talking to your parents, or go here or go there, we might not really reach very early the goal that we want to have, right? So at some point, we might also need to take some decision. But one thing that I want to mention is that these kind of tools might be really useful, but it means also letting something go from the privacy part, right? Because if you want the police to come to a child home and help him, you might need the address, right? So this is kind of a dilemma that you really want to solve. We need many actors around the table, that's what I mentioned, to really decide, okay, do we want it completely anonymous, no any data at all, or do we want to at least have some data, and that these data are only used in extremely grave situation and emergency situation where the police need to intervene. And then there is another work that is done, is outside of the technology side part. It's with the actors. Do we want a social worker there? Do we want the police with their outfit, literally with a child, which can be really sometimes very shocking, right, for a child? Or do we want actually, I don't know, a family member there? Or so these are situations that are both technological, meaning that we need sometimes to decide whether we want to keep it very anonymous, as I said, but also outside of the technology. But I think it worth considering it in the sense that at some point, children that are in these kind of situations are just I feel like they are just abandoned with this situation, right? I feel like we can do more, and I feel like we can just like let them know that they are not alone. We can do something, So it's kind of a balance that we need to find between, okay, letting them decide, but also at some point ourselves as child right protectors deciding whether we want to intervene or not.
Yes, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you for your answer, Jojo. And if there is no other questions, then we are almost out of time. So I would like to thank you for your time and dedication. Yeah, you have a question. Oh, thank you. Okay, sure.
I mean, it's always interesting to have peers and to also brainstorm, but it's all both for Aicha and Boglarka. One thing that I've been thinking, mostly working and brainstorming on this project is, yes, we're talking about protecting children from or against people that are outside of them that can harm them, right? To access justice. But how do we do to protect them from themselves? Do you know what I mean? Like, because they can be harmful also to themselves, meaning that they can have some behaviors that are really sometimes harmful, literally with teenagers, but how there are also some symptoms that are seen into some teens or some people since the young age, how do we do actually to protect them from themselves? What do you think with technology, and how? Yeah, this is something also that not that you need to answer, but yeah, outstanding question to myself as well.
Yeah, maybe I will jump into the answer because it just rang me the bell of the recent lawsuit against Character AI, which was just launched recently, and this is exactly about that, actually, about the suicidal thoughts. So for the audience to understand that there was a 14-year-old American adolescent who was kind of became very addicted to a Character AI chatbot, which is a companion chatbot, and it is very much, emotionally addictive. And it had conversations with that chatbot saying, I would like to join you, and I feel like also confessing suicidal thoughts. And these were not reported by the chatbot at all. So these child safeguarding alerts that it should have delivered in this case were not there, and in the end, unfortunately, it had a really bad end because he committed suicide after having talked to the chatbot. And yes, in this sense, I think it's also a liability issue at stake. So what is the liability of LLMs and of chatbots in such cases, and how this could have been really prevented? What kind of guardrails would have been needed? So that's just this topic in this sense with LLMs and suicidal thoughts. But on the other hand, I think that offering practical help, like practical information about helplines and everything for children, in this sense technology can be a good solution. So not diverting them to their parents or their other trusted professionals who might be also involved in their situation of being in a bad mood, or they might be also the reason why they are in such a bad situation because they are abused by them or whatever. So to direct them to this kind of more neutral services that can be available for them, that can be maybe a tool.
Thank you so much for the question. And I think Bogarka made a really, really interesting and really important point. And when you asked the question, I thought two things, and one was Character AI, and the other one was more in terms of, when we say harm, which kind of harm, because I think this is a great example, which, well, definitely a recent one that brings a lot of questions, and the use cases that also we are looking at those futures for children now is, although they do focus more at educational settings, I want to emphasize that these tools are just everywhere, these LLMs, and even Character AI, for example, they're being used, although not in a maybe in a wider scale, but in the context of education as well. So my point here is that they're becoming well, it's already there. They're affecting children, and probably they will do more. And it's super important that we think about this liability issue and making sure that in terms of the information that is being delivered, the content that should not be, harmful. And this is like, it brings a lot of questions in terms of, content moderation, or, this has different implications for different children's rights, of course. But I think when it comes to really these harms, there should be liability, and also we need to think about how this can be done technically, and these discussions should be definitely starting. And one thing that I would like to highlight maybe is that I think Bogarka also, when she was saying and delivering the information, just making sure that the child is aware of that, and whatever we can do at the design stage, or when the child sees any information, engages with the tool, that actually makes a child aware that this is just a tool, this is not real. I think discussions we are having today are also part of that, maybe safeguards that we should be thinking about. So yes, I think just some considerations, but really important, but a big question that we need to think further, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your answers and questions as well. And now we are out of time for real. So thank you again for your participation and time. And I think, I believe this was a very effective discussion. So I hope we will have the opportunity to continue it. And as I mentioned, the video will be uploaded on the project page, so you will find it, and I put the link in the chat box so you can find the project page there. And now we will share, or we are sharing a questionnaire that we would like to ask you to fill in, because yeah, your feedback is very important to us, so please fill it. Yeah, you will have time to do that now. And thank you very much again for the participation. Have a good afternoon. Bye.